My name is Jack Rome, and I'm glad to welcome you to Meet the Speaker, a series with speakers from the upcoming 3-day online immersive conference, The Infinite I Am, Awakening Beyond Identity in a World on Fire, taking place from November 14th to 16th. This series is designed to give you just a brief taste of the direct experience that you can expect from each session during the conference. Jenny Beal is a spiritual untangler, considering openness to examining and abandoning all belief systems to be the principal prerequisite for the understanding of our true nature. In Jenny's view, aligned with the direct path teaching, the spiritual path has no beginning or end, nor is there any distinction really between spiritual life and life in the world. When asked a question, she temporarily becomes a teacher, and otherwise, she remains a student and enjoyer of all that is. Jenny's conference session is titled Exploring the Practical Implications of Non-duality. So, Jenny, thank you again for joining us. And I know that your session, at least what I was reading, has been prefaced with the context that it's not simply enough or not enough to simply understand that there is one reality intellectually or consciousness is universal intellectually, but that we need to investigate what this means for how we live our lives. Could you describe what you mean by investigate in the context of daily life?
Yes. Well, first of all, really investigating the implications a little bit more generally and then looking at how
Mm.
they apply in our ordinary lives. So, yes, it's one thing to say, yes, I'm universal consciousness, I'm one with everything and everyone. But what does that really imply? And there's a number of things that implies. One of the things it implies, which is quite important, and which we can see for ourselves by exploring that consciousness that is the background of everything, of what we are, is that we don't choose our thoughts. Our thoughts just arrive to us. There's no separate entity that chooses their thoughts. There can't be. If there's just one being, just one entity, then there's nothing separate that can choose our thoughts. So our thoughts come from the universe, and that has all sorts of implications. One of the implications is that there's no one that's guilty for what happens. If what happens is seen as not very good, then there's no one guilty for that. We're not guilty, nor is anyone else guilty. It's an action of the universe, an action of God, if you like. Now, then, in a practical sense, how we apply that, well, that's very relevant to how we look at and how we interact with all the people that we meet in our daily lives. Sometimes they'll do things which seem unfair, unkind, really quite bad behavior, discourteous behavior. And if we realize, no, that's not this separate body mind, because there is no separation. That just comes from the universe. So then we ask, well, why does the universe cause these things to happen? And really, at the moment, we can see quite terrible things happening in the world. Um, and how does that happen? Why does that happen? If everything is just the act of universal consciousness, how can these awful things happen? And the way that we look at it in this teaching is to see for ourselves that the universe is governed by patterns. So it's very obvious in the physical universe that that's the case, because the patterns are really the laws of the universe, like the law of gravity, for example. We don't ask why is there gravity. Scientists might try to ask that, but they're more asking how does gravity work? Now, if we look psychologically, it's a kind of the mental realm, as it were, then you can see that there are also patterns in the mental realm. The way a child is treated when it's young will set up behavior patterns. But it's even broader than that. There are cultural patterns. There are um, there, there are patterns which change, patterns, global patterns, which flow throughout the world and which change. We can see one of the patterns which has been emerging in recent years is um, a kind of move towards extreme right-wing thinking, and we've seen that in many countries across many continents, and it's a global pattern. You can't really ask why. It just happens. So when we see people behaving badly, these are just patterns which are almost encoded in their body minds. And of course, if there is criminal activity, we need to protect society from criminals, and so we do lock them up. But should we really be locking them up to punish them, or should we be locking them up to educate them in how to act in a fair and kind way in society? That's a moot point, isn't it?
In regards to the conference theme, Awakening Beyond Identity in a World on Fire, you touched on the in a world on fire part.
Mm. Yes.
And it is interesting though for me to hear you talk about, it's not that we really ask, or necessarily that the question is to ask why a pattern is the way it is, like why gravity, but instead to recognize or see how gravity or any law or pattern works. Maybe you were touching on this, but I would be curious to hear, maybe in a more pointed way, when we see those patterns, or maybe I should put it, once we are in a state of consciousness in which we are able to perceive those patterns pretty consistently and reliably, what does that allow us to do, if it allows us to do anything, or what does it allow us to be in this world on fire, so to speak?
Mhm. In the moment, in the now, we have a choice, and the choice is either to well, it's basically between ignorance and wisdom. Once we have understood our true nature, that's really the first stage to understand what we really are. That understanding, once we have that understanding, that never goes. But what happens is that these habits of behaving as though we were a separate entity, and habits are really just patterns. Those patterns return just just through nature, because it's how it works. But in the moment, when if we see them, then we just the recognizing of those patterns for what they are, that immediately takes us out of ignorance and into wisdom, absolutely automatically. So there's no one that does anything. It's an automatic process, and it's a very beautiful process. one of the things that can be very helpful um, in encouraging this process to operate is to make sure that we are in touch with our body, because our body can tell us things before our mind notices. Our body can tell us things. For example, if we're about to respond in an aggressive way to someone who's behaved very badly towards us, and aggression isn't, that aggression is coming from a sense of separation, then often you'll get just a slight tension in your body somewhere, and that acts as a kind of warning, and it's a warning. Um, it's a visceral warning, and it says no, stop. And just in that stop, you recognize, no, that what I was going to say would have come from ignorance. I don't need to say that. Say something else.
Yeah. I appreciate you bringing it into the, I guess if we had to call it personal, the personal daily life,
Mm.
and noticing patterns there. I I really appreciate that. And it the way you describe it, it almost feels like, the prime practice is getting in touch with our true nature, is that recognition. And it comes across like, as our true nature perhaps is revealed to us, or maybe we reveal ourselves to it, that a a symptom almost, or a byproduct of this, is that we notice patterns. We'll recognize patterns, of course, because we are perhaps, looking from a vantage point in which I'm no longer just me, separate. And so, of course, I would be, or us, it, uh, words fail us, would be in touch with the patterns. Um,
Yeah,
does that
that's
make
that
sense? Yeah.
that's exactly right. It's exactly what happens, because um, that understanding, when something clashes with your deep understanding, then you notice that clash,
Mm,
and it's that noticing. It, Nothing more is needed really than that noticing. No, that's not what I understand. That's not what I am. Yes, if people um, i- if people find that certain situations tend to um, very commonly take them away from feeling, and that feeling knowing of what they are, then what another possibility is, just before you go into that situation. So it might be um, your weekly meeting at work, or whatever. Before you go into that to that meeting, you're just quiet for a bit, and you just remember what. I just ask the question: what do I feel myself to be in this moment now? Do I feel myself to be a person, an employee of this company? Do or do I feel myself to be everything, universal consciousness? And that that can be helpful. So it's just a way of a little way of reminding ourselves. We can invent all sorts of little reminders for any kind of situation where we see that we tend to um, get drawn into ignorance.
mm. Yeah, oh, what a brilliant question. I'm gonna ask myself that before all my meetings tomorrow at work. That is such a brilliant question. It's beautiful because just asking the question, that's all that's needed. Um,
Yes, yes.
yeah, brilliant. Well, thank you so much for this brief conversation. Looking forward to your session at the conference. But before we go, is there anything that you want to get across to folks who will join your session at the conference? Not necessarily if there's anything for them to prepare, but I mean, maybe there is, or just to come ready with questions. Is there anything you want to leave us folks with?
Yes, to really not to be afraid to ask questions that might appear to be basic or simple, because often the basic and simple questions are the ones that are actually at the deepest level. Not to be afraid of bringing up any practical difficulties that people have in applying the teaching in the various activities that they do, or or any worries about what will happen if I try to apply the teaching. What will happen? Will everything go wrong for me at work, or will people stop liking me, or um, you know? So sometimes people have concerns like that. Sometimes people feel that they should never get angry, but and in most cases, anger does come from a sense of separation. But there are some cases where it doesn't. It's just outrage, and that outrage is natural. So you don't want to suppress that. So if people want to talk about that, and you know, a lot of people around the world are living in really quite difficult circumstances at the moment. So very happy to discuss that and how you apply the teaching when times are difficult.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you, and looking forward to your session. Very needed, very important, very crucial for us. To everybody tuning in, we certainly hope that you'll join us at the Infinite I Am Conference. Again, it's from November 14th to 16th for more direct experiences, direct experience teachings, and just a chance to ask the questions, as Jenny mentioned. Simple questions, questions that maybe you think you shouldn't ask. Maybe those are the ones you should ask. And you can actually register for free at purepresenceconferences.com. And we hope to see you there.